this is the third day that I've been with you, and you've come back. I mean, that's saying something. Tuesday night, are you kidding me? It's a wonderful blessing again to be with you, and looking forward to tonight and tomorrow. It's always great to go back, and you know, there's some people in this world that you see, and maybe you haven't seen them in a while, and you kind of pick up the conversation where you left off. And I certainly feel that way here at the Jamestown congregation, being with you guys. I tried my best to challenge you and try to get you to think about things, and tonight isn't going to be any different. One of the things that's important to the Lord, and should be important to us, is leadership. And I know that it can make or break a congregation, especially long term. Back when I first became a preacher, I left, my wife and I graduated from Freed-Hardeman, and we moved to Southwest Missouri. We lived in a little town called Lamar. I mentioned that a few days ago. And while we were there at that congregation, leadership was something that we were actively pursuing. The congregation had started back in the 1950s, and they never had elders. And I think that they were okay with that. I think they had just kind of settled in and said, well, we like things the way that they are, but then at the same time, we read God's word and he says, this is what I want my church to look like. This is what I expect my church to be. And I think that there are some gentlemen who may have reservation about taking on that role, and I could understand why. And there may be some wives of some gentlemen that say, well, I don't know if I'd want that pressure on my husband or not, because there's so much uncertainty involved in leadership. You know, when you step back and you look at your roles and your responsibilities and you think, you know, I can do what I need to do without having the title. I can make a difference for the Lord in where I'm serving, and I don't have to be a deacon. I don't have to be a preacher. I don't have to be an elder. I don't have to be a Bible class teacher. And while that may be true, I think it's something that we should be always actively pursuing in the Lord's church, to have leaders the way that God has described his church to be. Now, I want to give you a challenge tonight to look at the life of a man that maybe you have studied recently, or maybe it's been a while, but you are very familiar with, and just approach his life in perhaps a much different way than what you've done before. We're going to look at the life of Moses, so I want to encourage you to turn your Bibles to Exodus, the 2nd chapter. Have you ever thought about what Moses was asked to do? Have you ever thought about what Moses actually accomplished and the things that Moses didn't accomplish? If I were to ask you right now, you're sitting in your pew, you're thinking to yourself, was Moses a success or a failure as a leader? How would you answer that question? You realize that God came to Moses and he said, I want you to lead my people out of Egypt into a land that's flowing with milk and honey. I want my people to live in houses that they did not build and reap from crops that they did not plant. Do you realize that only a couple of those that were over the age of 20, as far as guys go, didn't make it to the promised land? You realize that Moses himself didn't make it. Was he a success or was he a failure? We see when we look at his life, he goes through several phases. If you're there in Exodus chapter 2, we can look at his leadership attempts to begin with. Verse 11 says, now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. It's amazing to me, Moses, of course, is writing the book of Exodus, and he's saying, I even understood at this time that this Hebrew was my kinfolk. That's because he was raised by his mother, although he was raised in Pharaoh's household. So even though he is the son of Pharaoh's daughter, in one sense, he still realizes what his heritage is, and he is seeing the injustice done to his kin, and he doesn't like it. And he knows that there is a purpose that God has for him. And so what does Moses do? You look at there in verse 12. He looked this way and he looked that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Folks, what do you think about Moses' conflict resolution technique? He's beating somebody. This is an injustice. I want to kill him and bury him in the sand. He was a palace raised, probably had significant training, and he says, I'm going to do this great thing for Israel by using force. Well, he believes he can influence maybe the future of Israel by his muscle. And instead of trying to change the laws of the Egyptians and use his influence, he looks this way and he looks that way, knowing that what he was doing was about to be wrong. He tells me he intended to kill this guy. It wasn't an accident. And what do you think about that kind of leadership style? There's a difference between having power with people and having power over people. There's a difference between being in a role where you can tell people what to do and actually being able to influence people to do the desired outcome. Sometimes when you have a person who's a parent or an elder in the church or even a minister, or if you're at school, a team captain or a boss at work, or say that you're the leader of the cheerleading squad and you get that little bit of power, you got that title by your name, sometimes we think people owe us some sort of allegiance because we can force them into it. We can make their life miserable if they don't do what we say. Leading is not about having power over people. I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I can tell you what to do. It's about having influence with people. In verse 13, the second day he goes out and he sees two Hebrew men who are fighting. And he says to the one who did the wrong, "Why are you striking your companion?" Boy, isn't that the pot calling the kettle black, right? Moses is getting on to somebody for striking somebody when the day before he killed somebody. Why are you striking your companion? And notice the way that this guy responds. Who made you a prince, Egypt, prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And so Moses feared, for he said, surely this thing is known. And when Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and then he sat down by a well. Moses tries to lead with power because he understands that God wants to do something great through him, and he goes about it the wrong way. He just doesn't understand who he is supposed to be. Are you comfortable with yourself? You have some good self-confidence. We talked about humility. We don't want to be arrogant, but we have some self-confidence about ourselves. We trust in the skills that God has given us. I think one of the hardest things Christians has to do is we have to accept who we are and who we're not. God makes us unique and God makes us special. And you know, in the ministry thing, I know I'll never be the greatest preacher in the world. You know? Hey, we look at the guys who are out there doing ministry today, and it's amazing the things that they can do. Jesus was the best minister of all. We have the Apostle Paul and Peter and the guys that we read about in the book of Acts, and as great as the guys are today, they can't hold a candle to those guys. We have to realize I can't be Paul. I can't be Peter. I can't be James, and James can't be me. We are all created unique. We're all created special. And some of the things that God gives us, we think make us weaker, when in reality, they make us stronger. They make us vulnerable, but they make us able to reach people that maybe other times we can't. My friend Lonnie Jones, he always uses an illustration where he takes a rope. And he just has a rope, and he stretches it out, and he says, he ties a knot in it. And does a knot in a rope make a rope weaker or stronger? It makes it weaker by half. If you're going to climb a rope or you're going to descend from a rope, if the rope fails, it's probably going to fail in a knot. And he says, so why tie a knot in it? Because if you don't tie a knot in a rope, what can you do with a rope? The thing that makes it vulnerable is the thing that makes it functional. And it's the same thing with us. The things that make us vulnerable, we think make us weak, but it makes us actually have some function to us where we can accomplish some great things for God. It's not about what you don't have, it's about what you do with what you've got. What can God do with you right now where you are in your life? The influence of the people in your life, your children, your grandchildren, the people that you work with, your friends, your neighbors, what can God do with you right now where you are? Moses is trying his best to rule like one of the pharaohs. He's going to be this political leader. He's going to rule, and he said, I'm going to take this force. I'm going to take the military approach. I'm going to take power. And where does he end up? He ends up sitting down by the well in the land of Midian. Fast forward a little bit, and let's go to Exodus chapter 3. And I want you to realize the change that takes place here. And when this dialogue takes place, I want you to notice that Moses probably doesn't have the correct perception of himself, okay? Chapter 3 and verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert, came to Horeb, the mountain of God, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. And so he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight while the bush does not burn. I've probably been freaking out and running, but that's just me. Moses says, I'm going to go look at this bush. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. He said, do not draw near to this place. Take the sandals off of your feet, for the place where the ground is you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and I heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of Egyptians and to bring them up from the land to a good and large land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to a place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. And now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel have come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. So come now therefore, and I will send you out to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Moses said to God, who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Just the guy who was raised there. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Who am I that I should serve in the Lord's church in that capacity? Who am I that I should teach a Bible class? What do I know? Notice that he continues and he says, verse 12, I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. And Moses said to God, indeed, when I come with the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, they will say to me, well, what's his name? What do I say to him then? God says to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Moreover, God said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. God says, Moses, we've got a task ahead for you. And Moses says, who am I that I should go and do any of this? I can't do that. I don't have the ability to do that. I could never go to Pharaoh and get him to release the slaves and let them go to this land that you have for us. In fact, if you continue to look at what he says in chapter 4, he tells God, God, I'm not eloquent. Neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, I am slow of speech and I am slow of tongue. Church, you think Moses had an accurate view of himself and his abilities? The answer is no. You do not grow up in the house of Pharaoh being illiterate. You do not grow up in the palace without the ability to speak. That was not going to be a possibility for him. He was raised that way. Now, I'm not just trying to throw out some conjecture here. This is not speculation. The Holy Scripture tells us. Go real quick, mark this. We'll come back to Exodus. Look at Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7, you have Stephen giving a speech, and he's going to talk about Moses as a person. I always think it's amazing when I see Peter and I see Stephen, I see these guys in the early church, they're telling the Jews about Jewish history. But that's exactly what Stephen's doing. And they agree with him up until a point. But just as a note in the middle of Stephen's speech, I want you to notice what he says. He's talking about Moses' early life. And look at verse 21. But when he was sent out, on the basket, right? Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was learned in all of the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in what? Words and deeds. This is before the burning bush. It makes this statement. He was mighty in words and deeds coming up out of Egypt. But now he's saying to God, God, I'm not eloquent. I'm slow of speech. I'm slow of tongue. I can't do this. Moses doesn't have a correct view of himself and doesn't have a view of where God wants him to be. Stephen makes this statement here, and I think Moses has just forgotten who he is. He believes because he ended up in the wilderness sitting by a well that he was a failure in some way. We may have looked at him at that point and said, man, he did. He tried to do something in Egypt and he couldn't do it. He failed. He thinks because he watches sheep for his father-in-law that he's a nobody. He's trying to tell God, God, you don't understand. You don't understand how I ended up where I'm at. It was a bumpy road to say the least. I mean, I'm a bumbler. I'm a stumbler. I'm not eloquent. I've never been eloquent. Moses makes one mistake, and he believes that he's no longer who he was. He's forgotten who he was. You ever wonder why Moses ended up in the wilderness for 40 years before God called him back? Going back to Exodus chapter 2. So we have Moses sitting by the well. And so the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and they drew water, and they filled the troughs of the waters for their father's flock. And then the shepherds came and they drove them away. Moses sees this and he's honorable and he stood up and he helped them and he watered their flock. Now, when they go back to their father, he wants to know, how in the world have you come home so early today? How did you get everything done that you needed to do? And they're like, well, there was this Egyptian who delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock. Wait a minute. Is Moses an Egyptian or is he a Hebrew? He's a Hebrew. Why does she think that he's an Egyptian? Well, it may have been the clothes that he was wearing, but if I was running for my life, I probably would have ditched those. He probably had a different look about him. I'm going to guess, this is speculation on my part, I'm going to guess that the way that you make a Hebrew look like an Egyptian is you keep him out of the sun. He grew up in Pharaoh's household. He wasn't out there making bricks. He wasn't getting the straw. And as popular as it is for somebody to have a tan today, back then, a tan was someone who was poor because they were out there working all the time. And so you have Moses showing up at this well. He's probably looks like this callous-raised, pale-skinned Egyptian. And so God says, lead my people. And where's Moses going to lead them? In the wilderness. God says, look, you've learned all that the Egyptians can teach you. You've learned all their wisdom. You've learned all their literature. You have this poise about you. And I want you to be a leader for my people. But I need to send you to desert survival school. So Moses spends 40 years in the wilderness before he's 40 years in the wilderness with the people. Was Moses a failure? Or was Moses being educated? When God closes a door for us in our life, somebody says God opens a window. When God closes a door, he opens a window or something like that. Why is it then when God closes a door and it seems like we can't continue down the path that we had set, that we just stand there and look at the door? Maybe we should go down the hall and learn something on the way. And in walking down the hall, we can see that God can take this palace-raised, palace-decorated, inside life kind of guy, and he's going to lead some silly, groaning, grumbling, selfish Israelites. God's got to have somebody who's going to be able to take care of his people in the Israelites. He's got to have somebody who knows how to do that. And then God says, I'm going to send Moses to school. We need to be careful maybe what we ask of God, because sometimes God will teach us a lesson we might not pleasantly want to know, okay? We ask God for patience, okay, that might be tough. He might send some things our way that's not that pleasant. Moses says, I'm not wise and I'm not eloquent. God says, you've been here taking care of these sheep for 40 years, now I need you to take care of my sheep. Experience is not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens to you. The experience that you endure give you the credentials to help people who go through similar things. And so many times we get so miserable and discouraged that we just go out into the wilderness and we sit down by the well and just think to ourselves, I can't do anything right. God says, I've got you here because I want you to do something for me. There's a time to do things. There's a time not to do things. We have some teenagers here, got a few young people, kids, Teenagers are amazing. I've been telling you stories on the teenagers at Baxter because I can. They're not here. That's perfectly fine. They're probably not going to catch wind of this, but I've got some that they reach the age of 16, 17, 18 years old, and they think that they know the best about everything. I mean, okay, if you're a teenager, you can't get grounded for this. Do you think your parents are crazy? You think they've lost their mind? You probably do. You think mom and dad just don't know anything about anything. And it's true that there are some things that your 8-year-old probably know better than you. They know how to use an iPhone better than you do, probably. There's some things that might be the case. And I realize when a teenager gets to be 17 years old, when you're 17 years old, well, that's as old as you've ever been. You're at the oldest point in your life, right? Everybody who's sitting here tonight, you're at the oldest point in your life. How many of you have got a pair of shoes that's older than 17 years old in your closet right now? I bet there's several people, right? You think to yourself, man, we have the wisdom and we've gained so much. I mean, it's just not as impressive, is it? I mean, when a person turns to be 16 or 17 years old, Al Roker doesn't put your face on a Smucker's jar. That doesn't happen, right? You got to wait till you're 100, and even then it might be 101 or 102 now. Sometimes we reach a certain age, we think by being that certain age that we ought to be in charge. And it's confusing time for young people. They've got 1 foot in the kid world and 1 foot in the adult world. Mom, Dad, I want to go and I want to get my license. I want to have a car. I want to go to work. Why do you want to go to work? Because I want to buy video games. What? 1 foot in the kid world, 1 foot in the adult world. It's a trying time. They're old enough to fall in love, but they're young enough to pitch a hissy fit when they don't get their way. We ought to be the best that we can be wherever we're at. But if we find ourselves to be 16, 17 years old, 25, 30, 35, in your mid-40s, and you think that you know better than the elders of the church, or you think you know better than people who have had all kinds of life experiences, or you know better than your parents know, or you know better than your boss knows, you know better than all the people who are above you in your life and are authorities in your life, you're in for a world of hurt. You're going to bring some things upon yourself because you may know a lot about some things, but there's a big difference between knowledge and wisdom. With kids, you give them independence that's proportional to the responsibility that they take. When they show themselves to be responsible in an area, well, then, yeah, we give them some more freedom. That seems to make sense. I mean, and I'm probably very strict when it comes to youth ministry, but if we have a student that is not making good grades in school, I tell their parents maybe they shouldn't go with us to Gatlinburg for CYC. Like, why would you say something like that? Well, because if you have a student who goes to class for 8 hours a day and they're told what to do, how to do it, and when to do it, and they can't have like an average grade in that environment, can I trust them to walk around Gatlinburg by themselves? Or even with a small group of people? Responsibility gives freedom. And when we are responsible, we don't have to have a lot of rules. Think about Adam and Eve in the garden. They had one rule. They had lots of responsibility. They had one rule. That was it. God says one of the worst sins that you can commit is rebellion. And the reason why rebellion is so bad is because it says, I know better than you, and I'm not going to submit. And submission is based upon wisdom, and wisdom rests in those typically who are older. Moses thought he was going to lead before he was qualified. I'm going to free Israel. I'm going to kill people, and I'm going to hide them in the sand. Don't you think that would have been a little bit conspicuous after a while? Egypt has a gopher problem. There are people missing, and there's humps all in the sand everywhere. I mean, it wasn't going to work. But he thought, hey, I got this. I can take care of things. Ask yourself, though, tonight, why am I here? Where I'm at in my life? And am I listening to the voices of people who are qualified to tell me what I should do? In Exodus chapter 18, I want you to fast forward and notice something about Moses. Exodus chapter 18, Moses' in-laws show up. You've got a few million upset, grumbling Jews, and then your in-laws show up. I mean, what a day, right? Wow. Verse 12. When Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and some other sacrifices to offer God, Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, and he said, what is this thing that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand before you from morning until evening? And Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me and they inquire of God, and when they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws. So father-in-law goes up, observes what Moses does, asks him a question, and then says, the thing that you do is not good. How would you feel if God called you from a burning bush, had your word validated by a series of plagues? And by the way, the plagues that took place in Egypt, they corresponded with the Egyptian gods. Moses is God's instrument to deliver that judgment upon Egypt. Psalm 78 describes the whole thing. And at the very last, Pharaoh says, okay, we're done, we're through, take these people and go. They get to the Red Sea. Pharaoh changes his mind, sends the army after him. God, through Moses, parts the sea. They walk across on dry land, and when the Egyptian army pursues them, Moses closes the door. You realize he defeated the most powerful army without firing an arrow, without drawing a sword, without throwing a rock? He beat them by waving a stick over the water, and now his father-in-law is saying to him, the thing that you do is not good. How would you respond to that? Moses has learned to take instruction. I think Jethro knows how to give it. Notice verse 17 here. He says, the reason why. Because both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. When you have a problem, and you approach someone who has authority over you, say your boss at work, and you approach your leader and you say, this isn't working, well, they probably know it isn't working. That's not what Jethro does. He says, this isn't working. Here is why it's not working. And then he says to him in verse 19, listen to my voice and I will give you counsel and God will be with you. Stand before God, before the people, that they may bring the difficulties to you, and you shall teach the statutes and the laws and show them the way that they must walk and the work they must do. And then select from all the people able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. By the way, in between those highlighted things, I like those descriptions for men. Men who fear God, men of truth, men who hate covetousness. They're not going to be bought. They're going to stand for truth because they love and they fear God. And let them judge the people at all times, and it will be that very great matter that will be brought to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge, and it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. So Jethro comes to Moses and he says, this isn't working. Here's the damage that's being done. Y'all are wearing yourselves out. And here is a workable solution to the problem. If you don't have a solution, you're just handing a complaint to somebody who knows their weaknesses already and that they themselves don't have an answer to. If they had an answer to it, they probably would have fixed it already, right? So, if you were to look at your life tonight and your spiritual life on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put yourself? And what would it take to move you up just 1 point? You know, all the problems that we have in life are really because we have a lack of resources to deal with those problems. So if you gauge where you're at and where you want to be, what will it take to get you there? What resources do you need? We talked about that in our prayer life last night. John Gottman, you may not know who that is. He's a psychiatrist. He's written, I think, a few books. One of the ones that he wrote that I think was just great for understanding and communicating with people is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, okay? That sounds like a weird thing and sounds like something that, from the book of Revelation is where he gets the idea. And it sounds like, it might be some kind of crazy something, but it's not. He's just saying when you look at the way people communicate in these 4 ways, if they have these 4 traits, any relationship will have its issues and it's approaching failure. So he's like, these are the 4 horsemen. And the first one is, he says, when complaints sound like criticisms. When complaints sound like criticisms. He uses an illustration of a husband and a wife, and the wife could say the same thing in a different way, or the husband can say the same thing in a different way, and it be constructive, or it can be destructive, depending on how they want to do it. So, someone could say, I wish we were together more. Or they could say, you're never home. One's accusatory. One's saying, I wish that this is the way things were. At times constructive criticism is necessary. You know the difference between constructive criticism and criticism? Constructive criticism is something that I say to you to help you be better. Criticism is something that I say to you to help me feel better. I want to tell you how you wrong me. I'm going to criticize you. If I'm going to be constructive, I'm going to say, here's what you've done, but here is how it could have been better, because I want you to be better. Does that make a difference? Make sense? Okay. Number 2, he says, when you always focus on the negative, that's when you develop contempt for the other person. It involves name calling and insults. It gets to a point to where when you're talking to the person, you have a relationship, a friendship with somebody, your sense of humor is always at their expense. You mock them. You ridicule them when they make mistakes. He says that's the second horseman. The third one is where you have defensiveness. Defensiveness comes in 3 forms: minimalization, denial, and blame. Those are the 3. Whatever I do, if I do it, it's not a big deal. Minimalization. Or I simply just deny that I ever did it. Or I blame you for my poor choices. Minimalization, denial, and blame. That's where it comes in defensiveness. And then the last one is where you have a repair attempt and I turn away. A repair attempt when I turn away. So I make a mistake. I go to my wife and I say to her, honey, I'm sorry. I should not have done that. She can respond to me and says, I lost my temper. I lost my temper. Honey, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. And she says, okay, I forgive you. Or she says, you get angry about a lot of things. I'm trying to build a bridge and she's burning the planks. When you have a relationship like that, it doesn't work. If you're the coach of a team, if you're the manager of a business, if you're parents who parent that way, it's a problem where that relationship is heading toward doom. The Bible tells us that we should be people who our speech is seasoned with salt. We should use tact in our relationship with people. We get to a point to where we're comfortable with individuals, we love them and we're close to them, and so we don't think that there's any filter that needs to be placed upon our speech at all, and that's just not true. Because we realize James chapter 3, our speech can get us in a whole lot of trouble. Moses views his mistakes now as a training ground from God, and he starts leading the people the right way, and then he's able to take advice from people. Jethro will say to him, if you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and this people will go to their place and they'll be in peace. If you do it the right way and take advice from those who are qualified to give it, you're going to be a success. So, Moses, success or failure? He was a tremendous success because he did what God asked him to do regardless of how the people cooperated. Now, there were times where he failed, but your behavior never gives me permission to do to you differently than what God would have me to do. We are responsible for what we can control. That's a lesson that I think we all have to learn. In the church, I've learned that elders, they really don't like to be surprised by things. They want honest and open communication. I think everybody deserves that, don't they? Honest and open communication with each other. So I ask permission for things. I don't just do them and say, hey, this is the way it's going to be. It's my way or the highway. Folks, I don't have the qualifications that an elder has. I can't serve in that role. These men have Holy Spirit inspired qualifications that they meet. I'm not going to blame somebody for something that I can control and they can't. You should never make this statement. You made me mad. Anybody ever said that to you? You made me mad. That's not true. If you say that statement, you made me mad, what you're saying is you allow your emotions to control you. You don't control your emotions. If I could control your emotions, I wouldn't make you mad. I'd make you like me and buy me stuff. But I don't have that power. I only have the power that you give me, and I don't have that power, right? And so we have to realize Moses is a success because he says, I'm going to do what God tells me to do, and I'm going to be faithful even if the people aren't faithful. Well, what is it about this promised land thing? Right? Didn't get to go to the promised land. Can I put you at ease about that real quick? Matthew chapter 17. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with them. Where is Moses? He's in the promised land, on a mountain, talking to the Messiah. Let God write the ending to your story. We are terrible at writing endings. We'd have Jesus feeding 5,000 with no leftovers. That's not what happened. God says, I get to decide whether you're going to be a success or you're going to be a failure. He gets to put the final stamp on where you will be and who you will be. Romans chapter 4, verse 17 Paul says, as it is written, this is talking about Abraham, I have made you a father of many nations. It's past tense. Even though Abraham hadn't had any kids, I have made you a father of many nations in the presence of him whom he believed, God, who gives life to the dead. And notice this, calls those things which do not exist as though they did. God gets to decide. God says it's as good as done because I have said it. And so Abraham, who, contrary to hope, in hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations according to what was spoken, so shall your descendants be. It didn't make any sense, but he trusted in God. God says, I'm going to do this for you. Abraham says to God, you know how old I am? God is the one who takes a sinner and calls him a saint. He takes someone who is weak and calls them righteous. He takes someone who has lost everything and says, you can be my child. Moses' mission was from God. All he had to do was get with the program, with the position that God had for him. Anytime he acted outside of God's parameters, it cost him. But when he does it God's way, Moses was a fabulous success. What are you doing with your mission? With your opportunities? With your circumstances? Vision is the ability to see opportunity in the present circumstances. That's what vision is. It's not what you're not, and it's not what you are. It's what God can do with who you are. When it comes down to becoming a Christian, you know, those of you who have made that decision a long time ago, it's all about doing things God's way. It's about submission to Him and His will for your life. It's about what we talked about last night, how our will and His will continue to grow closer and closer together. If you're a Christian and you've been kind of running your own agenda and your Christianity is frustrating you and you're frustrated with your brethren and you're frustrated with God, it may be that you need to resubmit to Him and His ways, because His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. You need to submit to God, your life, put Christ on in baptism. Tonight would be a wonderful opportunity to do so. You need to come back to Him, resubmit yourself to Him, have forgiveness for sin that may be in your life, get rid of a rebellious attitude, and put God first in all things. We'd invite you to come tonight as we stand, as we sing.
Be the same again. I can never return. I close the door. I will walk the path. I'll run the race, and I will never be the same again. I will never be the same again. I can never return. I close the door. I will walk the path. I'll run the race, and I will never be the same again. Fall like fire, soak like rain, flow like mighty waters again and again. Sweep away the darkness.